While popular culture often associates mind control with conspiracy theories and science fiction, biological manipulation is a very real phenomenon in nature. Unlike the human MK Ultra experiments, which ultimately became both an ethical and scientific failure, parasites have spent millions of years perfecting chemical manipulation techniques to ensure their own survival. Today we'll focus on one of nature's most disturbing realities. Parasites capable of taking control of an infected host and altering its behavior to serve their own interests. Zombies do exist, not as creations from a screenwriter's imagination, but as tiny organisms that represent some of the most terrifying biological nightmares on Earth. Creatures capable of infiltrating a host's mind, modifying its behavior, and forcing it to serve an invader faithfully, often paying with its own life and with no possibility of resisting. It's a sinister reality that exists all around us, even though most of the time we either don't notice it or choose not to. I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, but Leucochloridium paradoxum is a species of parasitic flatworm with one of the strangest and most horrifying life cycles in nature. The process begins inside the digestive systems of various bird species, where the parasite reproduces. Once the larvae are ready, they are expelled through bird droppings and eventually land on vegetation. That's where unsuspecting snails become infected while feeding. One of the parasite's most dramatic manipulations involves changing the snail's behavior. Normally, snails are nocturnal creatures that seek shelter in dark, damp environments. But once infected, the snail is forced to become active during daylight hours and develops an attraction to light. This causes it to climb to the highest and most exposed parts of plants, making it far easier for predators to spot. Soon after, the parasite advances to the next stage. It effectively hijacks the snail's body and performs an extraordinary form of visual and behavioral mimicry. The parasite develops colorful blood sacs displaying bright green, white, and brown stripes that closely resemble caterpillars. To a bird, they appear to be the perfect meal. Once eaten, the parasite reaches the bird's digestive system, reproduces again, and the cycle begins anew. And speaking of cycles, the snail often pays a terrible price. In some cases, the bird only tears off the infected tentacle rather than consuming the entire snail. The snail survives and eventually regenerates the lost tentacle. The parasite then grows new brood sacs and starts the attraction process all over again. One of the most famous examples of behavioral parasitism is Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, a fungus that brutally invades various ant species. Microscopic spores enter an ant's body through feeding and take between 3 and 9 days to develop internally. Contrary to popular belief, recent studies suggest that the fungus does not actually invade the ant's brain. Instead, it spreads throughout the body, surrounding and infiltrating muscle fibers. It acts more like a puppeteer, directly manipulating the ant's neuromuscular system, while the ant itself may remain conscious. When the fungus is ready, it forces the ant to abandon the safety of its colony. The ant is guided through a deadly journey, eventually climbing vegetation until it reaches an environment with the exact humidity and temperature required for fungal reproduction. The fungus doesn't simply force the ant to climb. It guides it to a specific height, typically around 20 centimeters above the ground, where conditions are ideal for the next stage of its life cycle. There, the ant bites down onto a leaf or branch with incredible force, locking itself into place forever. The ant dies. Then the fungus erupts from the ant's head from this elevated position. It releases spores designed to infect even more ants. A tiny fungus capable of controlling an animal so completely that it willingly gives its life for the parasite. Scientists often refer to this phenomenon as the death grip. Although this fungus inspired the famous franchise The Last of Us, researchers have confirmed that it poses no threat to humans. If you were a cockroach, the last creature you would ever want to encounter is Ampulex compressa, commonly known as the emerald cockroach wasp. Despite being much smaller than its victim, the wasp possesses one of nature's most horrifying methods of control. The wasp doesn't simply sting the cockroach randomly. It performs a highly specialized double attack. First, it stings the thorax, temporarily paralyzing the front legs. Then it delivers a second, incredibly precise sting directly into the cockroach's central nervous system. The result is a chemical cocktail that transforms the cockroach into something resembling a living zombie. The victim remains alive but becomes extraordinarily submissive. The wasp then bites off part of the cockroach's antennae and calmly leads it back to its nest. Holding the cockroach by one antenna, the wasp effectively walks it like a pet on a leash. The cockroach offers almost no resistance. Once inside the nest, the wasp lays its eggs on the cockroach and seals the entrance with dirt and small stones. Even though the cockroach could potentially escape, it doesn't. The purpose of this manipulation is simple. The developing larva needs fresh living tissue, rather than killing the cockroach immediately. The larva slowly consumes its internal organs while keeping the host alive for as long as possible. Eventually, a new generation of wasps emerges. A perfect example of chemical submission pushed to its absolute limit. Saculina carcini is a parasitic crustacean closely related to barnacles, and caring for its own offspring is definitely not its preferred strategy. Instead, it hires a babysitter. When Saculina encounters a crab, it sheds its protective shell and searches for a tiny opening between the crab's joints. Through this gap, it injects itself into the host's body and begins absorbing nutrients. If the host is female, the parasite manipulates her into caring for its offspring as if they were her own. But if the host is male, a problem emerges. Male crabs are not biologically designed for that role. The parasite solution is brutal. Gentlemen, brace yourselves. First, it chemically castrates the crab. Then it alters the crab's hormonal system, gradually transforming its body into a more female-like form. It may even cause the crab to develop an expanded abdomen capable of carrying the parasite's reproductive structures. This isn't simply chemical castration. The parasite effectively rewires the crab's endocrine system, redirecting all of its energy toward raising the parasite's offspring. One of the most astonishing aspects of the infection is that the crab develops genuine parental behavior. It cleans, protects, and aerates the parasite's eggs as though they were its own children. Behavior that, under normal circumstances, would only be seen in a female caring for her own offspring. One of the most spectacular examples of behavioral manipulation in the animal kingdom is caused by a protozoa known as Toxoplasma gondii. This parasite infects rats and mice and dramatically alters their behavior. Research shows that the effect is surprisingly specific. The infected rodent doesn't lose its fear of every predator. Instead, it loses its instinctive fear of cat urine. Incredibly, infected rodents often become attracted to compounds found in feline scent markings. Rather than fleeing from a cat, they may actually move toward it. This behavior benefits the parasite because cats are where Toxoplasma completes its reproductive cycle. For the parasite, getting the rodent eaten is essential. But Toxoplasma becomes even more interesting when humans enter the discussion. Between 10 to 30% of the world's population may carry the parasite. Although the subject remains controversial, some researchers have explored possible links between toxoplasmosis and subtle behavioral changes in humans. Certain studies have suggested correlations with increased risk-taking behavior, impulsivity, and other personality traits. These findings remain heavily debated and are far from conclusive. What's especially interesting is that humans are usually infected not through direct contact with cats, but through consuming undercooked meat or food and water, contaminated with infected cat feces. At this point, many people begin wondering whether parasites might influence human behavior as well. Modern science views this question as a reminder of our own biological vulnerability. Even though our brains are vastly more complex than those of most animals, we are not immune to chemical or hormonal manipulation. Neurobiology teaches us that what we call free will depends largely on a delicate balance of neurotransmitters and biological processes. In theory, external agents capable of altering those systems could influence behavior in ways we are only beginning to understand. It remains one of the most fascinating and carefully studied frontiers in modern science. And despite their reputation as biological villains, parasites serve an important ecological purpose. By regulating host populations and influencing animal behavior, they help prevent certain species from becoming ecological pests. In doing so, they play a critical role in maintaining the delicate balance of biodiversity across ecosystems around the world.